Oh, I can. Can
You in
everyone
the
else hear?
chat.
Yeah.
G'day.
Perfection. So let us know if you can hear Tim and Keel, and then we will jump in. Uh, okay, it caught up. At least for me, the actual preview window is now showing what I believe it should be showing. Um, so we're going to be talking about the Impact RPG system. Before I dive in too deeply, I'm going to check the stream myself. So if you hear the stream, oh, someone was listening in a hidden window, it says, and then we popped up.
Yes, classic.
So let it be written, so let it be done. Tabletop Terrors is in your house. Okay, yeah, we're good. Let me just system. All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and say, if you are interested in getting a copy of this system in the form that it's in, which is probably 85% done, would you say, Keel? I mean, is that about right?
Yeah, for sure.
Then you can go to patreon.com/tabletop terrors. It is called the Impact Engine. And what I'm going to do is go through this with Kiel. Kiel has actually made a character using this system, which is fun. So how long did it take you, Kiel?
Oh, like a minute or two?
Yes.
Shall we say 2 to 4 minutes, 2.5 to 4 minutes?
That's great. Yeah, it's designed to be fun and fluid. And so character creation is just supposed to be super intuitive, where you just go, yep, do this, now write this, now do this. Hey, you're done. So I want to talk a little bit about the system itself and kind of like, well, what is it and why is it different? I would say if it's not putting you too much on the spot, would you be able to tell me what you think is stood out to you the most about this system in terms of whether it was different or something that interests you about it versus, say, Dungeons and Dragons or Fate? Is that putting you? If that's
Yeah.
putting you too much on the spot, I will pump the party brakes.
No, all good. I'll any gaps, feel free to backfill them behind me. So the big things to me that come to mind with it are it's obviously a very narrative focused system. And one of the big, or probably the big thing that sets it apart, I think, from games like D&D and pretty much any other system I can think of is that failure to achieve what you're setting out to do on a particular action or a particular role is not a given. So you always succeed when it's not an epic challenge or a particularly risky challenge. That's one of the big things that sets it apart for me, I think.
That's
And the
perfect.
fact that the focus is on impact and that concept of, instead of damage, or it's taken the concept of damage that you'd usually have in D&D, where you sort of roll smaller or larger size dice, D6, D8, D10, that kind of concept, but applies it to anything you're trying to achieve. And the spectrum of positive impact versus negative impact, I think it's just really unique and really exciting.
That's awesome. Cool. That's it. You did it in a nutshell. That's the point of this system is supposed to be, we talk about making failure fun and when is failure good, but this is more tying in failure directly to the story and directly to the rules. Instead of having to come up with your own ideas of how to, hey, fail forward. This system hopefully will make it very easy to layer that stuff directly into the story. And then the cool thing, I think, is that because the way that it's shaping up, you can codify and quantify prep in a different way. And that excites me as a game master. So you can still have all the fluid, fun RPG stuff that you want to have, but if okay, I have to fill in these slots, and those are the things that can go wrong, that's huge. So let's talk a little bit about what it is. The Impact Engine, it works very narratively, and it takes place mostly in the imaginations of the players, but it can also be played with minis and maps. What you do, in a nutshell, is that when you roll against a regular challenge, so we'll use a classic D&D challenge that we like to talk about a lot on Tabletop Terrors, which is picking a lock. Picking a lock on a chest or a door. In this system, you roll, and we'll put a pin in how you get your stats and all that. It's very easy, but it's a roll under system. You roll. If you succeed, you have positive impact. Mechanically speaking, you track that. Okay, I got, positive impact. You roll an impact die. Okay, I have 4 positive impact, and you track it on a sheet. If you succeed, but roll poorly. So I keep trying to catch myself because I keep saying succeed and fail, and it's really not. You succeed both times, but one does positive impact, one does negative impact. So if you roll and miss your roll picking the lock, you still succeed because you're good at picking locks. What happens, though, is you now have 4 negative impact. And there are counters of impact. So you have a personal counter of impact. There's a scene counter of impact. And then there's a full story counter of negative impact. So the idea being that you're still good at what you do, but things might go poorly. An example that was used was, if you're really good, let's say at a live stream, you know how to do it. It's not that you don't know how to live stream, but you might be tired, or, like Kiel, it's 6 a.m. for him. You might have, tech
terrible
difficulty.
Internet, like Kiel.
Terrible internet. It's basically you roll and you still stream. You still are able to do the thing, but maybe you disappoint someone watching. Maybe you hurt someone's feeling because you don't answer their question, or you're short with someone, or whatever the case is. That's how negative impact plays into the game. And so it's still a little bit undecided. We're going to play test, but as you work through a scene, you build positive or negative impact. When you hit certain thresholds, you're able to do certain things. So as of now, if you hit 10 negative impact, just as an example, one of your weaknesses is affected. Whatever that weakness is. And you can choose from millions of things that we'll have in different play sets. But if you're a superhero, maybe your weakness is, that you have a temper. In this, it's going to play as though you're temper, so that you don't have a choice. Your temper, you lose your temper. Maybe it's an external thing that your secret identity gets revealed if you hit 20 negative impact to the people in this scene, because that would be one of your weaknesses, is you have a secret identity. Some positive things I'm also thinking, Kiel, would be like when you hit 10 positive impact, you're able to use like a bonus ability, or say something good happens, or like I have connections. So every time I hit 10 positive, I'm able to say that I have a connection in the scene, or something like that to kind of reward that positive impact play. How does that sit with you overall?
Yeah, I like it. I like it really well where it's pre-structured enough that you kind of, it's like pre-prep a little bit, where you can, where you can just pull from, but it's still flexible enough that it can be informed by what's happening in the scene or what's happening in the story at the time. So yeah, I really like the approach for that. And so would that be, okay, using those examples there, would I predetermine the thresholds and exactly what would happen when I get to them? Like when I get to 10 in this scene or this session, or when I get to 20, is that how it would work? Like before we start, I would sit down and decide what I want it to be for that session if it happens, or is it more, they're just base thresholds, 10, 20, whatever it might be, and they're tied to, for the positive, they're tied to my strengths, and for the negative, they're tied to my weaknesses.
Yeah, I want it to be whatever is the most fun and flexible. So I'm open to either. I think the thresholds would be set, and I'm thinking that's where, so the way that the math will shake is that, we have a certain number that we're going to hit on average between the D4 and the D12. So kind of figuring out in a scene about how much impact is happening, will figure out where those static numbers are. But I think to start, it would be static numbers, and then maybe for the positive stuff, you can choose. So in game, maybe make it flexible like an ability where it's like, okay, hey, you have these 4 things that you can spend positive impact on, and then you get to pick. And so then you can say, hey, it'd be really handy right now to be able to use this thing in this scene. So they're predetermined when you make your character and general enough to be useful, but then you spend them when you hit that. And then maybe conversely, the game master spends. So I know what your 4 weaknesses are, and I decide, wow, for this scene, it'd be really good to bring out your temper. So I'm going to spend that on when I hit 10 negative. Something like that. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. That's what works really well for me. I think like having certain things predetermined, but nice broad things that can be, implemented in different contexts, basically. So yeah, like you say, like if the weakness, the extent of one of those 4 weaknesses you said, if the wording of that weakness is literally secret identity, then that just has so many possibilities, right? But it's still specific enough that we know kind of what it's about and what the threat there is. That obviously it's secret identity is listed under weakness, so the threat is revealing your true identity, or
Yeah, so. Exactly. And I will hit the chat in a little bit. The thing I wanted to mention too was that I think the cool thing about that is if it's general enough, as you just mentioned, like with secret identity, if you roll it into something for an entirely different play set that's set, say, in the West, and it was just called Love for Gold or like Love of Money, there are so many things that, for me as a game master, that's the stuff I need in the middle of an improv moment, because then with other things that are happening in the scene, I go, hey, your love for gold is going to come up right now. So let's figure out a way that there is maybe some money in this scene that would be risky or would risk the goal of the scene for you to take. And now the character has that option. Do they take their turns and their actions to like now go and try to get this valuable thing? Or do they, so that kind of stuff. So if I could then, how would you see rolling that into powers? Because I like maybe that same sort of thing. Maybe that's, well, let me tell you how powers work as they're written now, and then tell you what I mean. The way that a power works now is, and James uses this example to explain this well, you just say that you're doing that thing with your power, and you do it. There's really not like you fail or succeed at your power. If you're and we'll have to dial in the specifics of what that means, but the example that James uses is the Avatar The Last Airbender show. Those characters in any given scene can bend elements, and it's not about how good they are at bending elements in most cases. It's part of who they are as a character. I don't watch that show and think, they bend that way too well, how cheesy, because the character drama is really good. So we're going for that. We're going for that thing where it's like, if you have super speed, it's not about quantifying that, measuring it, and making it so that you can only run 10 moves. It's, you have super speed. You move super fast. Just describe that to me. From there, I have to tie something mechanically in so it doesn't feel too fluid and not different from one person to the next. So perhaps that's the way they're written now. Perhaps the way to do it is the power super speed comes with 4 things you can do specifically mechanically that you can buy. And so if it's move twice in one turn, say, or whatever it is, if you have 10 positive impact, you can buy that thing. That is maybe how we could do the positive impact, where your powers are fluidly like narrative, but how do I make them mechanical and super narrative? And do you like the idea that you can buy certain things within your powers?
I do actually. And what it makes me think of is the little ability bar in like World of Warcraft or League of Legends or something like that. And I'm imagining it because you can always kind of do what you can do as a speedster, for example, right? But it's like every scene that you start, they have their cooldown on, and you have to wait until you get the cooldown. It's kind of, I know mechanically that's not how it's going to work, but sort of
Sure.
narratively, to me,
Sure.
that's what it's like. Like if we're starting a scene, I'm the speedster, or I'm a character who is a speedster. Certain things I can just narrate doing really fast, but because there's those mechanical bones of there's an action economy and all of that, that's then where it ties in. So yeah, I could spend 5 impact to take, or whatever it might be, to take 2 move actions on a turn or something like that. And I think that would work well because I'm already narrating things by moving really fast. But then when it comes down to the mechanical stuff, when I roll and I get a bit of impact to spend, then I can have that mechanical stuff to back that up. And it's not that I'm suddenly learning that power or anything like that. It's just that it now comes out this way in this scene.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a really good starting point. That kind of gets me at least where I can be to write them, because most abilities, and I will jump to the chat here in a moment, there's a lot of really good conversation going on and some questions. The way that rules work well for me is when you set up your framework and then you have character abilities that break those rules so that you can do things outside of the framework to differentiate your character, And so
that's a perfect way to put it.
And so for me, that's what board games are very good at. James has made the comment before that, what a board game really is, especially when it's in its sweet spot, is here are the rules. You break the rules this way. This thing breaks the rules this way. This is the exception. And you basically have those things. That's how I like powers to be. So the idea would be for this, if the whole system is based on positive and negative impact, you would in turn maybe spend your positive impact to affect the impact, which sounds silly, but it also is, I have to figure out what I just described to you for this system. That sweet spot of what you just described, how do I write that out? How do I actually figure out what that mechanical thing is? Because Speedster is a little easier because there is a move action. But what happens when you have someone who's great with a sword and it's a little less like, hey, there isn't really an attack action in this game. You know what I mean? So it's not as easy to tie it to, oh, you can attack twice because you can't really, I don't know if that makes sense. So because there's an action specifically for that power, moving to a power where there isn't one, I'm trying to figure out how to make that mechanically sound without just using impact to change impact, if that makes sense. Or maybe that's okay too. So I don't know if that rambling makes any sense to you, what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've just got ideas ruminating because I'm thinking about the sort of interplay between impact and how it's got, because it's not a push-pull thing, is it? It's not positive and negative and going back and forth. They both accrue towards both ends of the spectrum, right?
That's correct. So
yeah,
they do. You have a counter, and the GM tracks it like they would hit points. So the scene also has a positive and negative track. So when you go, oh, I did 10 positive impact, the GM writes that for the scene's positive impact.
Yeah, that's cool. So that's like the sort of meta currency, I suppose you could call it. That is something ripe to like impact. The poor choice of words to affect. We're using powers, right? Like that, because that's the mechanical thing that determines like the narrative effects, which then have mechanical underpinning of things as well. The duration of a scene, when things are leading to a climax, whether that's good or bad. So having powers, I think this is what you were touching on before, like have powers be able to maybe clear a little bit, like some powers clear a bit of negative impact. Or add some extra positive maybe. I think, seeing it in action will help with that sort of thought process there in terms of, do the rich just keep getting too much richer if it's, I've got 10 positive impact, I spend that to use this power, which lets me roll another D8 of positive impact and just keep,
Exactly.
is that too much of a snowball thing? So it'll take a bit of testing to see where that sits well. But yeah, and I think as well, like, because it's such a narrative system, and this is something we've touched on but haven't really explained, I think explicitly in this stream at least, is that it's very scene based, is the structure of play, and it's all leading towards a climax scene, right? So I think that's something to keep in mind as well.
That is a good point. That is a very good point. And so, yeah, that's okay. So I think you're right. Having players say, hey, I want to make this character is going to really help me figure out what the powers are. And so that's kind of the next step. I think we're definitely doing a playtest on Mini Terrain Domain on January 22nd at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And I'm writing the powers that will be used in that game for that game. So that will help me. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump to the stream. We have a lot of really cool people watching. James is here, and he is spitting hot fire with Barker from Ignite Inspire the Story, also on Patreon. So let's see here. So I don't want to just fall into the trap of reading the comments, but there's some good stuff.
Yeah. I've been keeping up a bit as well.
Okay, perfect. The one thing I think so James has some really cool stuff that he said. He said, it sounds awesome. In many games we know something would happen. It's just great to have a list of things to pick from. So good. I'm glad, James, that's hitting you in a good way. Grady says, giving the GM an ability or a thing to spend for a scene sounds a little crazy. And it does. The cool thing to remember is, and Kiel, I'll let you speak to this as well. These are signposts and cues. They are not the only thing that will happen. So it is a narrative cue that, hey, this negative thing happens. You could always say, as a game master, you'll always have the ability to say, you know what? I feel like this negative thing would happen for this scene. And that's just okay. But it, at least in my experience as a game master, knowing that character's specific weaknesses lets you play on the themes of that character rather than a random challenge. But you could also create a list of negative things for the scene.
Yes.
So it's not related necessarily to you, but it's that, let's say, and I'm going to use a general tag, but let's say it's like crumbling. Hey, this thing collapses because you're at negative impact. So your actions. Now, again, it's all about being in the moment, because if you're using this system, it's not all about hitting stuff. You could have an argument with dice. So I could be trying to convince you using my ability, of like just influence. Thank you. I'm going to roll. And in that scene, the way that this is written, the narrative outcome would be, hey, I just did negative impacts, unfortunately. What does that look like? If we're having an argument and I have positive impact on you or negative impact, that matters. And so the reason why I brought that up, though, is that it's all about being logical, because if we're having an argument, you could still make something crumble for the sake of narrative effect. But would it make sense? Maybe. It's always up to the GM. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, gets to 15 negative impact, the relationship between our two characters crumbles, as an example. And what I really like about this system, and I've mentioned it before, this is the way this system is shaping up is a great incarnation of something that I tried to make as well. So it's really cool to see similar approaches like come to life in this way. Like, I really love this system, and I think just how flexible it is and it's going to be is just really cool. Like, where it's, I don't know if fractal is the right word, but where you have fractal modular, I'm not sure, but where you have like these lists of positive and negative, like pick lists, character-based ones, scene-based ones, story arc-based ones. So in this hypothetical scene where our two characters are arguing and we're not dealing, what's the terminology? Having positive and negative impact on one another and on the scene, like anything, like we're in an apartment having this conversation, the phone could ring and it could be, you know what I mean? It just really paves the way for external factors to come in, I think it just really opens that up because as players contributing to the scene or as the GM, someone could knock at the door, you know what I mean? Like that could be a positive or a negative impact, you know what I mean? It could be positive impact, like the door knocks and it's the pizza delivery person, like, and that is enough of a breather to sort of give us some breathing room in the argument, you know what I mean? Like it could just, I think it's just so flexible, and I'm really excited to test out its limits and what kinds of scenes you can do with it, so and just quickly talking back on the like sort of codifying options to pick from for the GM. There's a precedence for that, like in a few different ways, like in Apocalypse World and Powered by the Apocalypse games, there's a precedence there. Like the GM has moves, which are basically just a codified list of everything that you can ever choose to do as the GM, but it's just codified in a certain way. When the players roll a failure in Powered by the Apocalypse systems, that's when you make a move. Whether it's a hard move or a soft move is up to you. And then going over to something like the Star Wars system, the Fantasy Flight Star Wars system, in terms of saying the GM has like resources to spend to impact, that has, are they coins or dice? But they have these points, basically dark side and light side points in Force and Destiny, where the players can spend them. And when you spend it, you flip it. So once the players spend it, it then flips and becomes a resource that the GM can spend for bad stuff, So there is definitely a precedence for this kind of thing. And there's different ways that it's exists in different systems. And I think this is a really cool, unique way that you're taking.
That's cool. No, and that's a great example of, I didn't even think about Powered by the Apocalypse and the moves. That's a perfect example. Couple of questions from the chat. One is from Barker. He says, question, in an upcoming Superheroic playtest, I want a character with the power of suggestion. Sort of a good guy Kilgrave from Jessica Jones. Thoughts on how that would work? So yeah, I do have thoughts on how that would work. So you would say that you're using your power, and I would allow you to just narratively tell me what you were trying to do. I also want to make sure that there are some ideas of all the powers. So someone who isn't as experienced, or maybe isn't necessarily someone who can improv that kind of stuff easily, can still pick a power and feel like they're using it well. So like there'll be some cool stuff to like, hey, here's some things you can try. And then, so what that would look like is you would say, hey, I want to convince this person to let us into the compound. And I go, awesome. Go ahead and roll. And at this point, powers would be tied, I believe, to either a power die or, as of now, they're tied to an ability, an attribute, So your strength powers, you have, brain, mind powers, intellect powers, and things like that. So that would be, I'd probably let that be either intellect or willpower, where it's your willpower versus theirs, or that you're just smarter than them. So I'd let you choose whichever one you'd want. And then you would have a target number. And again, we're going to put a pin in how you get all this, but it's real easy and it's really fast. You'd have a target number. Like, hey, all right, great, go ahead and roll. So you would roll. If you rolled a good roll, you would have positive impact. So not only would you be able to do that thing, but the scene would also have something positive. So I would say as a GM something like, oh, you know what? Not only that, they think that they recognize you, and they also give you a key card for inside, maybe. if you have a lot of positive impact.
While we're on that, can I ask, given this hypothetical then, because we're talking about you kind of have your weaknesses as like a pick list of inspiration for negative impact, what's the equivalent for positive? Use your powers in that way, or that's not, I know that's not the intent of the powers, but that would be like your distinctions and stuff, right?
So I don't know yet. I don't know. That's a really good question.
Because it doesn't need to be anything, but the benefit that we have on the negative side for it being a little more structured, it would be great to have that same kind of scaffolding on the positive side, I suppose.
I think it would be your powers, and whatever the equivalent would be for that playset. So like, yeah, and that's kind of the spot where I'm not sure exactly where to let it rest and how the difference between like suggestive powers versus super speed, like what those would look like, and can they just be very general? But I do agree with you that there should be like a pick list of like, if it's definitely something I need to figure out. Really good question.
But on the positive side, it could be just more scene focused rather than character focused, because they're a lot more situational, I think. And then, you know what I mean? Like, so in that example, so on the negative side, you've got your weaknesses. So secret identity, if I'm someone who has the power of, influence, and I roll to, convince the guard to let me in, and I get a negative impact. Because it's not a risky scene, I still get in, but they're a bit sus on me or something like that. And if one of my weaknesses is secret identity, then that could, threaten that. It could play into that, and it could just be as simple as in the background when there's a shot of me walking past and the boom gates in the background going back down, and the guard is like on the phone and looking at me really suspiciously. It could just be as suggestive as that, and then something's going to potentially come due, or it sets the tone for me going into this building. Versus if I'd rolled positive impact, then the tone moving into the next stage of this scene is very different.
Yeah, that's perfect, and that I think is exactly how I would play it. Yeah, that's perfect. So Barker, that's how it would work. Now I want to touch on something that is currently called a risky challenge in this version. So if you constantly succeed, it can feel like it's not as fun. So there are chances of failure. And so the way that this would work would be on, say, a security guard who is considered, an average person. So let's say you use her suggestion and she lets you in. And you have positive impact, and Kiel, those two examples you use is great. If you had negative impact, they might like radio inside, like they let you in, but something else happens. There are things called risky challenges. A risky challenge is something that is your power level or higher as determined by the game master, and you can fail that. You still have positive and negative impact, but the difference is you don't just auto succeed. So if you're trying to take over the power of another hero or villain, they are a risky challenge or a step above. If you rolled and didn't get what you were trying to get, you would fail and roll negative impact. So there is the chance of failure as well. So that's how I would do it. You just describe to me how your powers of suggestion work creatively. I would tell you go ahead and roll, and then we would see if it had positive or negative impact, and then we'd tally it. If it's a risky challenge, you don't auto succeed. You can fail and have negative impact. And that felt good to me because it makes it really easy to decide what challenges are important and what should make you feel like in the movie, in the show, in the comic. It's not about the failures of the crime scene detective or that kind of thing. It's about the conflict. So that's where negative impact comes in. It would not be a super fun show if every time they, whatever show you're watching, they hit a challenge, they failed. You want to see them kind of like, barely make it through and hang on the ledge and climb over and jump through the window and all that. That's what this represents. But then when they get to that room and there's someone who is equally matched in skill, there is now a fight and you can get hurt. I think now might also be a good time to bring up resilience. So
yes,
every stat has a health bar called your resilience. And the other thing that happens is when and I'm not looking at the rules. I forget exactly how I have it written. But basically, if you fail a risky challenge, the negative impact doesn't only give you negative impact, it also does that much damage to your resilience. So it's like wearing down that ability. So if you're very smart, you're rolling against someone who's equally smart, and you're like, oh man, you can lose resilience until that hits 0. As of now, that's kind of how it works. But that's also where it can be dangerous. So you don't just try anything every time all the time. You succeed at the stuff you should succeed at, but can have negative impact. And then there are challenges that you can fail at and even hurt your willpower, hurt your might, so it's not like damage to you physically always. It can be, but it's also you're sad. It makes you sad, or it makes you feel self-conscious or less smart, or your brain's tired.
Yeah, or despair, or whatever it might be, for sure. So I really like that as well. And that only happens in a risky challenge, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so I'm just looking at the wording of it now. You might have mentioned it in here, but just as to double check. So as your resilience is getting worn down, so say let's use the character I've made. My agility is 17. So my agility resistance is also 17. And say I take a hit to that impact, say I take 7 and it gets knocked down to 10. When I'm rolling to test my agility, usually I would roll a d20 and have to roll under 17 to make it a good roll. I will try not to say succeed, although in a risky challenge it would be succeed.
Right.
But when my agility resilience is down from 17 to 10, do I still have to roll under my base 17, or is now in effect, like functionally, is my agility down to 10? And so it's harder to do agility-based stuff.
So what you just described is an optional rule.
Okay.
So this is actually a long discussion between me, James, and Jeff. What happens if you do that the way you just described is a death spiral. And if you want that, then it's really handy, because if you now have to roll under a 10, it's harder. And it gets harder very fast.
Oh, yeah.
So then now I'm rolling under a 10. Oh, I fail again. Oh, I take more damage. It can... So what we were talking about is that would be perfect for one of the play sets of this game's rules that are set in Gloam.
Oh, yeah.
Where you want it to be a death spiral. That's part of it. For a superhero game, it wouldn't be. And for the base rule set, it's not. Because it would very quickly... But we did think it was a fun idea of like, hey, yeah, you would definitely have players think twice before they attempted stuff. That's the other thing. It would change the vibe of the game, and people would be like, no, I'm good.
Yeah, and Death Spiral is just perfect name for that.
Right?
And that's exactly what it feels like. Yeah.
It's what it is. And that was Jeff's term. I don't know if that's an existing thing, but he's like, oh no, it's a death spiral. And I was like, okay. The reason why that also super touches on the tone of a game where like Gloam or an old school dungeon delve is, you do want players to think twice before they try stuff. That's part of why you're not gonna punish them for trying. You're gonna punish them for failing, but you punish them pretty hard and it gets worse. So yeah, we're definitely gonna have it as an optional rule. I had it in the original write-up. By the way, if you want a copy of these rules and you want what we have currently, they're on the Tabletop Terrace Patreon. If you go, it's the $3 a month tier called The Chunk. It's one of the chunks. It was released today. You can get instant access to this, and you can make your character. It's not a finished system, but as I mentioned earlier, it's like 80-85%. You could definitely use it.
And my eyes are happy. If you can spare $3 a month, I can't recommend it enough.
So, thank you, man. Hey, Ruslan is here from Israel. DBJ is here with some good comments. I'm going to jump on that as well. Jose says, are you going to be able to pick and choose different powers like a mix and match? That is exactly the plan. That is 100% how it's going to work. So if you were going to build, a legally dissimilar Superman, you would decide how you wanted to do that without going too deep into it. You choose your power level by basically in character creation for the superhero game. You get a certain number of power points. You can spend those on whatever you want. So if you want to spend them on more resilience, you can. If you want to spend them on higher attributes, you can. So you get a certain number of points. So if you want to spend it, and it's a very simple 1-to-1, like 1 point gets you one of these things, or if you want to instead say, no, I'm going to use all my points and buy 5 powers, you can do that. And you can buy, heat vision, flight, invulnerability, super strength, and one other if you wanted to add super speed that he uses. So that's it. You now have those 5 powers as Superman, whereas someone else could spend it on 3 powers and then buff up their other stuff if they wanted. Now, the power level, the GM could say, hey, we're playing a power level at whatever high number it is, so you could build whatever you wanted. That's kind of the plan.
Power level 9,000 over here.
That's exactly right. That's it. Barker says, this is great. My main thing was wanting to fail at the task without my ability failing. And that's the best succinct description of how the system is. You can still fail at what you're attempting without failing the ability. You fail to do what you were seeking to do, which is do it without friction, do it with no problems. So yeah. And he says, so yeah, I wanted the target person to be suggested and then have failure come elsewhere. And that's exactly what happens. And then PC Rage 2000 says cascading failure. It's exactly right. There was a comment by DBJ that that was up.
Yeah,
there.
I've just got that. I got that here. So
you
it says maybe impact.
Yeah,
maybe impact hides behind a wall that a power removes temporarily. Examples: pedestrians, force field, long range, computer virus, titan-sized vibranium armor, burning building, etc.
That's interesting. That could work. Like, essentially, it's moving obstacles, sort of like the way that, if I'm understanding it right, how do you understand it? Am I understanding that right? What he means?
Yeah, I think where he's saying, so maybe impact hides behind a wall that a power removes temporarily. So what powers do is let you deal with certain mini challenges, maybe, or things that are in the way of not dealing impact, having impact, making impact. Yeah. Yeah. I think I might not quite be interpreting that one right, but it's an interesting idea of, again, like the way what powers could be used for, because they're a little bit up in the air.
Yeah. And that's DBJ, if you're still here and you want to comment a little more on that, feel free. I think it's a cool concept, but I want to make sure we're understanding it 100%. PC Rage 2000 says, so a speedster can build up points and later use those points to, say, create shadow clones or something. So there was an idea that I had. So you want all the rules to encourage play. So like encourage play styles. Like we just talked about the death spiral. If it was more dangerous to do things, you wouldn't do as much, potentially. In that same way, I did think about like an ult, like an ultimate, like in Overwatch, where if you save up your positive points, then you can do the super thing. Let me tell you the way that I wanted to do it, and you tell me if this sounds too broken to you. I liked the idea because that's fun, but I didn't like the idea that you couldn't do any cool stuff in the interim because you're trying to bank it. Because then what if the scene ends early and you didn't get to use your thing? So the way that I have it now, and it's not written out yet, but I was going to try this, is the one issue is that there's one more thing to track. You could do it with a character sheet, but like with tally marks or something. The idea is that for your ultimate, the total accrual of positive impact counts. So even if you spend it, when you hit, like, hey, you've had 30, you can use your superpower now. It just seemed like one extra thing to track. Again, the problems I had with it were I didn't want the scene to end before you could use your superpower. And then I didn't want it to be that you can't do anything cool for the whole scene because you're saving up to do the one superpower. Yeah. So, I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think personally for me, I mean, it'd be easy enough on a character sheet to just keep track of a cumulative positive impact. That's basically what you're talking about, right? Like,
yeah.
Across scenes and even across multiple sessions if it's a campaign. Is that the idea, or?
I haven't thought that far yet.
Or when would it reset?
I would say per scene.
Okay.
For a personal hyperpower or an ultimate, it would probably be like,
I see. So whenever anyone in your group, so say you've got a group of 4 player characters, whenever in a scene, whenever any of them deals positive or negative, I keep saying deals.
It's fine. I say deals too. No, you can deal impact. Yeah, okay. That's fine. Yeah. Deals impact. Yeah.
Whenever they deal positive or negative impact, that adds to either end of the track for the scene, right?
That's correct.
And that's what matters in terms of impact, things happening and it getting towards a climax either way for the scene, right?
So far,
whether the scene ends positively or negatively for the group, but yeah, so currently, if all we have to do then is every time I deal impact, whether it's positive or negative, if I keep a tally of that as I go, then that could work. But I think making it more, I'm imagining it more like, because we were talking before about sort of spending impact, or maybe that was just me using that terminology.
No. That's kind of how, that's how it would go.
Oh, you'd actually spend it and it gets knocked off the tally? Like what you've...
Maybe.
Because I was imagining it maybe more as a, like, triggers. So in terms of when you reach certain thresholds, like certain things get triggered rather than you are banking it and then spending it. Because unless I'm not remembering it right here in terms of...
No, I think you are. I don't think it's written. So the way that in our discussion, because what we're talking about is sort of not decided in the rules, the way that I was suggesting is you would have a shorter bar that's like 5, 10, 15 maybe. And when you get to 5, you can choose anything.
Yeah.
So it's a shorter bar with a menu rather than at this one you can do this. And then at this one you can do this. And then it's just,
gotcha.
Hey, you hit 5, use whatever you want. Hey, you hit 10, use whatever you want. And then in that case, I was saying that if you happen to hit 15, you can use a super thing. That's what I meant. And then you spend it and then you go, but it doesn't have to be that way. It could be cumulative where you just tally it up.
Yeah.
And if you don't
doing
spend
it that way. It's literally just a tally, because it's just a representation of how much impact you've had on the scene. And it's kind of like momentum, it's like how well you're doing narratively in the scene, even though you've had some setbacks, because me as my character as one of the 4 player characters in the scene, when I deal positive impact, then that's like me having a positive influence on what we're trying to achieve in the scene. When I deal negative impact, then that's generally external factors messing me up because I'm not failing. Even if it's a risky scene, it's generally not because of my incompetence, it's because of external factors messing me up.
Right.
Even if I do actually fail at doing the thing, if it's a risky challenge. So,
yeah.
I think I partly lost my train of thought, but yeah.
Oh, well, no,
So
I was following you.
No, okay. I remember now what it was. Because the positive impact that my character deals is that can be tracked, and that's kind of, my narrative momentum in the scene. But negative impact, like bad stuff happening to me, doesn't happen in the same way. That the good stuff to me happens when I make good rolls, if we put it this way, put it really simply.
Yeah.
Bad stuff doesn't happen to me necessarily when I make bad rolls. And when anyone else makes bad rolls, you know what I mean? I might be collateral damage on someone else's negative impact roll, for example. So in terms of tracking that bad stuff happening to me, that's not as necessary, but tracking the positive stuff that I've dealt is what we care about really, in terms of, and again, it's not about unlocking powers. So the wording will be important there, but it's about having the opportunity or the positioning or whatever it is in the scene to be able to 5, 10, 15 do any. And I think being able to do your ultimate even at 5 is maybe a good way to do it. Or if we put a pin in that real quick, if you don't mind me continuing to talk.
No, this is exactly what I wanted for this stream. This is beautiful.
Taking a different sort of thinking of it from maybe a different angle for the way that might work is having your powers so that they're a bit more like so talking about your ultimate is what we're trying to sort of figure out here specifically. Yeah. So the ultimate is once per scene, or maybe even once per session. And it is that sort of gate to it. So you can do it the very first thing you do in the whole session if you want, but that's the only time you can do it. And maybe it's not about having to accrue a certain amount of impact to be able to do it, but it's that it deals extra impact. And possibly with the ultimate, it always deals a certain amount of positive and negative because of the sort of room for collateral damage. You know what I mean?
I like that. That's cool. And so
so you can do it straight away, but there's a risk involved, and you can only do it once in a session.
And that's kind of the cool thing and again, I don't want to make it too complex, but if you wanted to, you could make it so that you can use it once per session. And if you accrue enough positive impact, you can use it again. So that way you can use it, and you're just a super speedster. You can create shadow copies of yourself, like we said, scene 1, act 1, you just, but you're kind of spent now. You did it. That's taxing, or whatever power you want to use. Then if you build up that positive impact and you're feeling really good and things are going your way, if you hit a certain number again, it's like, hey, you unlocked that again. So you then have 2 uses of it. Something like that where it feels good. Because what that does, whether we choose to do that or not, just to kind of give everyone who's watching an idea of why I'm even suggesting this, is it has a certain feel. And it feels good when when your choices in the game and your successes in the game let you do better in the game mechanically. You know what I mean? So I like that because it feels like, oh wow, we did all this positive impact. You feel it's a really small kind of thing, but that endorphin rush of bubbling in the 15 and unlocking that because you're doing well as a group is cool. I like that feeling, So anyway, yeah, I think that we're definitely close enough to where I can take a crack at writing something out. And usually in that phase, when you actually have to start writing it out, you start having the logical discussion with yourself of, well, that doesn't work. And then do it this way. And, at least version 0.1. So that actually was a very helpful conversation. So yeah.
Yeah, good.
We definitely...
DBJ got back.
Oh, good.
I think we'll be finishing up soon, but DBJ said, so negative impact triggers a general obstacle is what he was suggesting there. A superpower is more effective in wiping it away.
Got it.
Examples, innocents in peril are wiped by super speed crowd gather.
Got it.
Not handling that obstacle limits positive impact. Yeah, okay.
That's perfect. That I get what it is. So it's basically like, that's actually cool. You can use your positive impact to literally erase negative impact effects. That's really cool.
A thought I have with that, which might not, I'll just throw it out there,
sure.
is So currently negative impact only accrues in the scene if player characters fail their roll, right?
Well, positive accrues if they succeed. So
yeah, sorry, negative. I meant to say negative.
only. Oh, yeah. So only. I thought you said
Yeah,
positive and negative. Yeah, negative only happens if they fail their roll.
Yeah. So, and again, I know this is might not fit in with how it's currently designed, but yeah, I think there's something to DBJ's suggestion there, where at whatever 3, 5, 10, whatever negative impact, potentially a new obstacle comes up. You know, it could be that one of the character's weaknesses is threatened or comes up or whatever, or it could be that a new in-scene obstacle, is how he worded it, is presented, you know. And this might make it a bit too much room for snowballing, or a bit too out of the GM's control maybe, but I think there's something to that, where either negative impact always accrues every turn, or there's just the potential for a new obstacle to come up every turn. I'm just thinking of superhero stuff specifically, where there's,
Sure.
you know, Spider-Man's trying to stop a speeding train, and I suppose that's kind of built into the scene that the GM's prepped, though, really, isn't it? Like, they will have an idea of the potential obstacles and the potential stuff. I'll throw it back to you. How would that look at the moment in terms of, if, say, there's a speeding train that's out of control and it's going to go, you know, off the monorail at the edge of the thing very imminently, and Spider-Man's there trying to stop it and save the civilians and whatever.
Yeah.
How, as the GM, do you sort of handle that and handle the different obstacles and different little mini challenges within that scene?
Yeah, so, you know, still trying to parse that out exactly, but the way that would be handled would be, at the moment, and I don't even know if this is in the current copy of the rules, at the moment, the way that you would prep that is with the same positive and negative impact tracks that the characters have, the scene has. So if the scene hits whatever number of negative impact, then one of the cars flips off the track. Like, that just happens, because that's how much negative impact has happened. If the scene hits, and as of now in the example that I wrote, and that's also on the Patreon, there's like, it's a pencil drawn, like, rough mind map, but as of now there were parallels. So it's either the train flips off, you know, one of the cars falls off the track, and then the other thing was that it would be safe. The car is secure. So if you hit that much positive impact, that would happen. And then, you know what I mean? So as of now, to answer your question, when you're prepping, and that will be part of codifying your prep, when you're prepping something that big, and you'd have to decide if that was a climax or not, but the way that your scenes would work is, when you hit a certain number of positive impact, certain things happen. When you hit a number of negative impact, certain things would happen. Now, I haven't decided yet whether or not those are actually tracked out and they progress, or if it's similar, where the track goes up to 15, just as an example for this explanation. Every 5, I get to pick from the menu. But when it hits 15, the train crashes. So you can pick things in between there, but there's a definite resolution. That was attractive to me as a game master for prep, because you have
Me too.
an obstacle, it's clearly laid out, it's specifically there, and you know what you're doing. So you're like, okay, so you don't accidentally prep a scene that doesn't have a challenge in it. Which I often have done.
We've all done that.
So you're like, oh wow, I'm just telling a story. This is just, they're all standing here. So yeah, so the way I have it now, your personal track, you track it, and the GM tracks everybody's positive and negative track for the scene, and things happen.
Yes, awesome. I like it. Yeah, so to answer that question about sort of DBJ's example there, yeah, that's the stuff that you've sort of got pre-prepped, is those obstacles, or like fallout, basically, of negative impact. Yeah.
And something really, really important is, You don't have to choose from the menu. So in the story, if narratively Barker says, hey, there's this thing in the scene, I can then use that thing in the scene. So it's not, you don't have to choose from, again, it's a narrative game. It's supposed to be about storytelling and giving you cues and a track to tell a cool story. So if I'm like, hey, we're at 10 negative impact, there will be a general description of what that looks like in a scene. You know, where it's like, hey, when it hits about 10, and you call it something, whether it's, I don't want to have to come up with names for all of it and people have to remember it. So like, well, at 12, it's a catastrophe, but at 5, it's a impediment. But have a rule of thumb where it's like, hey, the higher the impact, these are the kinds of things that would happen. So when you're prepping your scene, and when we release these story kits, a scene will have, hey, here's some high-level stuff when you get up to this number. These kinds of things as cues. But you could come up with anything you want.
Yeah, perfect. Oh, I'm so excited.
Right? It seems pretty cool, right?
Very cool.
So one final thing, and then because I want to definitely be respectful of your time as well. So
good, yeah.
Okay, cool. The thing, let's see. Oh, Barker, I wanted to mention this specifically. Use the optional rule when it's time to fight Thanos, which is the death spiral. So I just wanted to briefly describe, kind of like throw the hand grenade and close the door. If we were talking prior about how like, hey, you're talking about the game master has these rules of what they can do. Let me tell you how I see a climax going. The way that a climax works is that this whole time through these scenes, the game master has been tracking how much total positive and total negative impact that you have had. A great example, and PC, I think it was PC Rage. Someone made a great example, and maybe you might spot it. It was about the way that you succeeded the task, but you destroy the city. Collateral damage. It was PC Rage 2000. We're winning the battle, but destroying the city. That stuff adds up. And so here's the way that it works. At the end, and we don't know what these numbers look like. We got to play test it, figure out the numbers, dial them in. At the end, when you get to the climax, there's an actual break where the players and the game master plan the climax together in this way.
Yes.
You take your total positive impact, and the players get to spend it like currency on certain things. The game master gets to take all your negative impact and spend it on things as well. Again, there's going to be this general track of like things like this for this much. But then there will be specific things that you can prep. So if I know that there's something that you botched in the first one, or you didn't catch the villain, whatever, that villain can show up in the climax, and I can spend that negative impact and go, all right, I'm going to take 10 negative impact, and I'm going to buy this. You also, it's the weather's terrible, and this and this and whatever. And then you can say, and I haven't decided how I want to do it yet, because I don't want it to be, I may be thinking, and remember, because I'm going to want to hear your thoughts on this particularly, I don't think it's okay. I think you have to go one at a time. So you take turns, and you're not allowed to undo somebody's thing with your points. So I'm not allowed to spend my points to say, no, it's sunny. Because really what will end up happening is, first of all, it's kind of like the opposite of good improv. But second of all, you'll both have spent your impact, and it'll just be the regular scene.
You'll end up in a white room, yeah.
Yeah, right? So you don't want that. So you go one at a time, and then I will say, hey, the weather's going to be terrible because I know you all have such and such a powers or whatever. And then I go, okay, we also know the people who own this facility, so we get this. And then I go, okay, cool, I like that. You're like, oh, and then we do this, and we get to sneak in. Or we get this kind of things. Hey, what's up, kid?
Hello.
Little terror. Give me a smooch.
Hey. Ooh, hey, little terror.
Wave.
Hey.
Um, so sorry.
Yeah.
So what I was saying is, and then basically one at a time, you basically buy, and then all the points are spent, and then you play out that scene.
I love that. That's my jam, man. I really like that.
So yeah, that's kind of the way that goes. And I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but I think it'll be a really fun way for everyone to have a say in that final scene and then play it out. And it makes positive and negative impact matter.
Yeah, throughout, leading up to that point. Yeah, for sure. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And that ties in with the way that you prep. And I think it's still this way. And you might have changed it since you first mentioned this, but when you kind of prepping it, you prep backwards, right? Like you think about the climax scene first, and then you think about what points kind of lead to that.
That's the concept now. And I know that it can seem constricting. This game is more about a social contract of playing out a story, less about full-blown free run of going anywhere and doing anything. And so that's the goal right now, is that, and you don't have to do it that way. You could absolutely organically figure out, what the climax would be this now, right? Okay. But yeah, the concept between these play sets and what an adventure would look like is it's a climax and then the pieces to build scenes that pull directly from the climax. So you want, if it's a train robbery, you want the climax to be on the train during the robbery, like you kind of pick what the climax is and then you pull threads from it to weave throughout the other scenes. The benefit of that is that everything makes sense and that the story is very cohesive. So yeah, that's the plan as of now. We'll see. I think we can make that work.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
And yeah, like you've got that check-in point before the climax scene starts anyway, to check in and sort of see, all right, set that scene together, based on the impact that's happened so far. So yes, you've sort of prepped that first, or it's worked backwards from there, but it's inbuilt flexibility, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that, as of right now, that's the impact system. Definitely check out. So if you like Kiel's thoughts, if you love the kind of like advice he's giving, check out his Patreon. It is Run Right Play. It's linked in the description. He just came out with a zine, first issue of this really cool zine. It's loaded with game prep and just like recaps of some of his games. It's really good, really well done. So highly recommend. So check out Kiel's Patreon. And if you're interested in the impact system, you can get a working copy of, like I said, most of the rules are there. I mean, there's a game and it's formatted, and the powers are very thin. So, but you could absolutely play a scene using what we just described. None of the playset stuff is there for you though. So like, there's not like, hey, when this happens, when it hits 5, do this. You'd kind of have to, improv that. But the role, how you make a character, how you get stats, all that stuff, it's all done. So yeah.
And it's slick, real slick. Like I said, it took me a couple of minutes to make a character.
That's awesome. That's great.
Thanks so much for having me, man.
You're very welcome. These conversations for me, this is what I need. Did you see Cole's comment?
Yeah, there is in issue 1 of the Run Right Play zine. There's a nice big quote by Tim Carney on one of the pages about creativity. So
that's funny. She said, and he's not just saying it because he's got a big old quote in there, and that's the truth. If you took the quote out, it would be equally as good. So the thing that these conversations do for me is it gets me to the next step of, it's like, I've never been in a writer's room, but I've watched a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and the way that a writer's room works on a great TV show is you talk about it a lot. You just figure out what you're going to do, you talk it through, and then you go write. For me, writing isn't the hard part. That's the easy part. It's knowing what to write. That's the hard part. And so having these conversations and having you and a sounding board and the great people who have hung out with us in the chat makes it super easy for me to go, okay, cool. I think I know what the next thing should be. Even if it's a feeling. You take this weather system in your head and you channel it through your fingertips into the next version of the game. These conversations help a ton with that. So thank you, because the last chat we had with me, you, Lloyd, and James is what got it to the impact system now. And this conversation will probably get me to version 0.3.
Oh, yeah.
So,
awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I'll just do one final check for any final comments or questions. Thank you so much for hanging out. Cole, sorry that you got a phone call, but it's all going to be here. You can stream. And Craig, he did say he loves the parallel thinking, positive and negative impact. And he said it's similar to how Essence works in his system. There's an RPG he's making called the Wave System. But he had similar issues that we had with banking them and all that stuff. So anyway, I'm going to end it with a Tabtarian toast, and we'll go ahead and do that.
Can I do the middle part?
You sure can. I was going to ask you. Yeah, absolutely. May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
And may you conquer everything you undertake.
Snatch.
Now that's a toast. Stay tuned for January 22nd. We're going to do a play test of this on mini terrain domain, and we're going to stress test it. So by then I'll have something figured out and written. But thank you all for hanging out. Have a wonderful night. Hope you're safe, well, healthy, and continue to have a happy new year.
Take care.
All right, we're done.